Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
So what is that saying about death and taxes, the things that we can be sure of? Well, we might be able to add acute politics in the Carolinas to that list of certainties. Welcome again to the most widely watched source and the longest running dialogue on Carolina business and public policy. I am Chris William, and we may be able to call it the El Nino of politics here in the Carolinas. Both North and South Carolina General Assemblies are either just convening or in full swing. It is, of course, a presidential election year, and it seems like the local and state policy rhetoric has never been more acute. Our panel, Ted Pitts and Stan Kelly, enjoying the discussion in a moment. And later, Bob Geolas, the man leading a billion-dollar makeover of Research Triangle Park.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Ted Pitts of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, Stan Kelly from the Piedmont Triad Partnership, and special guest Bob Geolas, President and CEO of the Research Triangle Foundation.
Hello, welcome again to our program. Happy spring. Stan, good to have you back.
Thank you.
And Ted, welcome. Good to see you again.
Chris, good to see you again.
Gentlemen, I want to ask you this question, and I don't want to get deep into rhetoric around social policy. In North Carolina, House Bill 2 has become the bathroom bill, as they call it. In South Carolina, Governor Nikki Haley came out and said, we don't have that issue here. There is an anti-refugee issue that's floating around South Carolina. But the point is this, Ted, how do we find ourselves, how do these social issues end up eclipsing, I'm not going to say real issues, but I'm going to say substantial issues like education, transportation, family issues. How do we get off in almost the silliness of the social issues that are a bit indefensible?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at politicians, they're politicians, and they're trying to find issues, obviously, that they think their base or the electorate wants to hear them talk about. And a lot of times they're doing that actually to divert the attention from the issues that really need to be addressed, like infrastructure and workforce development, and those things that really do advance the state and the people. So I think when you look at the kind of the rhetoric we're seeing around social issues or issues that you just referenced, I think it's politicians trying to divert the electorate's attention. And in some cases it works. The media buys hook, line, and sinker, and there we go. We're talking about those issues. But I think that the chamber, and I know my counterpart Lou in North Carolina does the same thing, is we really focus on those free market principles, those issues that are good for jobs and good for business.
Is it by and large, not just your membership in the chamber, Ted, but is it by and large the folks that you either hear from or talk to or interact with feel the same way about the social versus the more substantive issues? Yeah,
well, you referenced the bathroom bill. In South Carolina, that's not an issue, and you heard the governor say that. Nobody's called our office once with a problem. We don't have local governments like maybe in North Carolina that you've had. So it's literally a politician who is up for re-election, looking for an issue that gets his name in the headlines of the paper and hopefully strikes a chord with the folks that he represents.
Stan, you said in a State of the Region address, you said the alignment of strategies and collaboration in this region is higher than I have ever seen at any time. How does that square against what some of this HB2 rhetoric has been?
Well, Chris, we're at a place where there's so much good momentum in our region and across the Carolinas, for that matter, business-wise. And so you have a lot of people in our respective regions that are making a lot of sacrifices, making a lot of investments, doing all that they can to push this state forward, more progress, more good jobs, et cetera. So clearly when things of this nature enter into the mix, it's disappointing because it hurts the momentum. And it's another obstacle in the business of job creation to have to confront. And so, it takes you back a half step. But North Carolina and South Carolina, we have a record of making good progress economically, and it's a long game, and this too will pass.
So, the last primary election that just happened, first quarter, North Carolina seemed to have come together. More than 2/3 of the voters had endorsed the $2 billion bond bill. Does something like that lose momentum when the social comes to the forefront and overshadows this?
Well, I think the voters spoke with that bill, and it was an overwhelming support of the bill. And education has always been one of the crown jewels of North Carolina, and so I don't think there's any loss of momentum, if you would, relative to our focus and the importance of education, and certainly education's place in the forefront of the progress of North Carolina job creation, et cetera. So I'm not concerned about that so much. It's just as we compete on a global basis, making sure we have the reputation that as a state that is inviting and encouraging of progress, that's what we have to be very mindful of.
So Ted, in South Carolina, it seems like the chamber, yourself, have been very outspoken about transportation issues. Do you feel like the General Assembly and the governor are doing enough about getting the money needed, or at least getting a promise of future monies to get transportation done? So
they've agreed on the governance model in theory. So they're working on a plan that would have the DOT be accountable to one statewide elected official. Currently in South Carolina, our agency is accountable to multiple entities, General Assembly elected commission and the gubernatorial appointed secretary. So, the entities, the executive branch and legislative branch, are working on a plan that provides for that agency to be accountable to the governor, and that's important. I do think there is a strong interest from most policymakers in Columbia to adequately fund the agency. Currently, the numbers that they're talking about wouldn't be that long-term sustainable solution that the business community is expecting. But it is a step in the right direction, and we're going to keep pushing on it until the General Assembly does what has to be done, and that's maintain the condition of our roads and bridges, which are in disrepair. And if you ride in North Carolina, you see it. You ride into South Carolina. We always joke, you can tell when you leave Georgia and North Carolina and come into South Carolina because you start hitting the potholes and you start to run into traffic jams that maybe you don't in the other parts of the region.
Last year during the State House's session, and I'll pick on Speaker Lucas to some degree because he was very expectant that the House, at least, was going to have a serious transportation bill with some serious dollars. That seemed to never materialize. Is there a worry that that might happen this time, that the session's going to end with a big promise and a lot of talk, but not really funding?
Yeah, so last year the Speaker said that, and then the House did their job. The House debated a bill, passed a bill early enough in session and sent it to the Senate, and it was basically got locked down with a filibuster. This year the Senate has passed a bill and sent it back to the House. We're hopefully they can come to an agreement on a plan, but we fully expect the General Assembly to change the governance of DOT and make it accountable to the governor this year, as well as provide some additional revenue, real dollars, to infrastructure to deal with the problems we have with infrastructure in South Carolina.
Yeah, as you just said, Ted, you cross the border and the roads may be good, may not be good in North Carolina. Stan, how, in the Triad and further out, as you zoom out from the Triad, how does the Piedmont Triad partnership, how do you interact with the General Assembly and those folks around transportation and infrastructure issues?
Well, first of all, to your point, Chris, infrastructure is one of the most important economic development tools that we have in North Carolina and in the Carolinas, and that, good roads, good railroad, good systems, that's one of the early on questions that anyone considering expansion or relocating their company to North Carolina is engaged around. So it's on the short list of really, really important things. And North Carolina has done a really wonderful job over the decades in building great infrastructure. So we're very engaged with those in Raleigh and in our respective regions to underscore those. And quite frankly, there's many, many millions of dollars on the docket to be invested in infrastructure in our region in the next 2 to 5 years, actually, as we speak.
Is that because of the bond issue? You feel secure that that money is going to get deployed the way it was?
It's because of not only the bond issue, but the state of North Carolina, and a state that's revenues are in a better place today than they have been for some time. And so, these are in the budget. So then there are tractors and bulldozers underway. So these projects are happening as we speak. So, and it's vital as we continue to build business and build jobs in North Carolina. And we've got wind in our sail as it relates to infrastructure.
Stan, this might not be fair to ask you, but just in about 30 seconds, do you think the brand of North Carolina has taken yet another hit with this last social issue around the bathroom bill? Is this, if Amendment 1, however you feel about it, Amendment 1, the voter ID, the bathroom bill, these type of issues get national press, and it's not always good national press. Is it hurting North Carolina?
Well, let me just say yes. At the end of the day, and just this week, and I'm sure that many could have gotten many phone calls from around the regions, around the state, around the country, around the globe, relative to these issues, and they've been played out in the media, if you would, but there are a lot of CEOs of companies who are concerned about this bill and the reputation that it creates for North Carolina, and so we have to be very aware of that, and over time make sure that we're embracing all of our constituents, but it has created a hurdle, as I alluded to earlier, unquestionably.
Any chance Palmetto State's going to pick up some of those relocations for economic development?
I think things, and Secretary Hitt at Commerce and Governor Haley, I think they probably have talked to some folks in the last couple of weeks about just those things.
I'm sure that's come up. We'll leave it there, not to put you in a bad position. Gentlemen, thank you. Stay with us. Yeah. Bring our guest on in just a moment. Next week on this program, he is the CEO of Cone Health. Terry Aiken will be here on the program. And then in 2 weeks, the Greenville Health System, the upstate of South Carolina, has been on a tear now for a couple years. Mike Reardon, who heads that system, can be mostly responsible for that. He will be back on this program in a couple weeks. Mike Reardon from Greenville Health. Research Triangle Park, or RTP, is the largest research park in the country, and one of the largest in the world, and it may be one of the oldest, which also means it puts it close to 60 years old. It is now embarking on a very bold and audacious redevelopment plan. So how does the gravitational pull of what it is now and what it may become change the plans of the communities like Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Cary, to name just a few? Joining us now is RTP President and Chief Executive Officer Bob Geolas. Bob, welcome to the program. Somebody said that you're going to like him because he's jovial and he's smart. And here you are smiling as we see. Welcome. Good to have you here, Bob.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
How are you going to grow that park in $1 billion way?
Well, first of all, I think you've got to keep in mind we already serve an enormous constituency in the park. Over 220 companies. We have a rolling average of investment in the park of about $1 billion every 5 years. So we have a terrific brand to work with, and we have a terrific community already in place. But there is a growing concern that if the park does not evolve and innovate, we won't continue to maintain that brand. So we really have no choice but to be just as audacious in this redevelopment of the park as we were 50 years ago with the original development of the park. So we as a foundation are working with the private sector. We're working with our leaders in the park. We're working with private developers. We're working with government leaders. We're looking at projects all over the world that are getting a reputation themselves for being innovative. And we're simply going to get started. We're going to make key investments. We're going to get started with new community amenities like hotels and residential and retail, all the things that will start to play a role in this new development.
So how do you bring everybody around the table? Like I said, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Cary. How do you do that and have them not feel like, well, wait a minute here, we've got yet another city this is turning into that's going to compete with our way of life?
You do it very carefully and very respectfully. But the truth is this. The Research Triangle Park brand has become our region's brand. More people talk about the Research Triangle region than they do the specific cities. So we're very proud that our park brand has become our regional brand. But with that comes enormous responsibility. If our park brand is diminished because we're viewed as outdated, a dinosaur, then that impacts Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. It also impacts our universities, Duke, UNC, and NC State, our three founders. So the truth is that all of those communities and universities have a vested interest in our innovation and our success. They're actually very supportive of what we're doing. Durham, which is actually closer to us than Raleigh, just pledged $20 million to the redevelopment of RTP for the very first phase of redevelopment. That's a significant investment, but they understand the importance of the park to the whole region.
Ted.
Yeah, and Bob, your involvement with CUICAR in South Carolina is where people are well aware of that. I was wondering, how do the institutions of higher learning, like you've just referenced, the three that are tied in with you in the research park, Research Triangle Park,
Right.
And then Clemson obviously with CUICAR, what sort of catalyst do they serve in actually what's occurring in the park?
The truth is, they're the absolute heart and soul of it. If you don't have the university connections, then all you have is a land deal. The value of the park, or CUICAR, or any effort like that, is built around the idea that you've got a talented workforce, great research, and you have to look to the universities to lead that. No one else can do that as well as they can. So we really are absolutely committed and believe fundamentally in the universities as our success. Look, when we took on RTP, and I think to a certain extent what happened at CUICAR and Clemson as well, was a recognition that our greatest resource in North Carolina and South Carolina is our people. And that resource can only get supported by great institutions of higher education, strong commitment to public education. And so we absolutely rely on it. It's the lifeblood of RTP.
But let me follow up with that. I'm sorry, Stan, let me just
Yeah.
jump in here quick. But it's easier to do with one university. I mean, you got Clemson now. I mean, you've got the Syndicate of Duke, Chapel Hill, NC State, to name just a couple, that you've got to balance all of that academic syndicate. How do you get that gang working together?
Well, look, I think that's what most people around the world come to see. We're the only university, a research park, I should say, in the world where you have three top universities who guide us, and they do that. The history of the park, the 60-year legacy, is that relationship. They all sit on our board. We are essentially Switzerland for them. They can come together in RTP and do things that they can't necessarily do by themselves on their own campuses. We like to joke that NC State won't go to UNC, UNC won't go to NC State, and none of them will go to Duke, but they'll all come to RTP because at RTP everybody has a stake in its success, and everybody can come there and work together.
And you got a state alum here that wants to ask you a question, by the way.
A fellow
Stan.
state alum, right? Fellow state alum, yeah.
Bob, it's having grown up in the Triangle and watched the success of the park for 60 years, and it's just been a juggernaut of success. And so what's interesting is what kind of got you there, or got us there, is not necessarily what's going to keep us there as we move forward. And so say a little more about what you're having to re-envision as it relates to reinventing Research Triangle.
Well, you know, if you look back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, what brought a lot of the investment in was that there was a great suburban culture. It was the suburban renaissance, if you will. People were leaving the urban centers. Now we're almost seeing the reverse. Our cities have been reimagined, and people love all of that dynamism that comes with urban life. And so they don't necessarily want to work in mom and dad's old research park anymore. So, but when we look at RTP, it can't just be about how do you bring in urban amenities. It's also looking at what is the culture within the park? Is the culture open? Is it dynamic? Is it innovative? Are there opportunities for people to engage? So there's a much more programming that has to go on within the park than just the physical development. The other part I think that's very important is what role does it play in inspiring people? I think one of the most frustrating things about RTP is that when you visit there, you have no sense of the role it's played in people's lives, from medicine to networking technologies to global satellites. And we need to bring that science and technology out in a way that people can feel it and engage with it, get excited about it. All of those things. It's a very exciting time to be thinking about that, but it requires a new way of looking at our physical development in the park.
Ted.
Yeah, Bob, follow up on, I guess, the university question. Obviously, Clemson and CUICAR, it's there, and that relationship is strong. When you look at the Research Triangle Park, and kind of the politics that you referenced of the three universities. Do they all, the way it works, do they all kind of find their turf that they're most comfortable and they claim as we'll be the subject matter expert on this? Or is it truly a collaborative effort, from an outside looking in perspective? That's just interesting to me.
Yeah, well, it's been far more organic than that. So what happens is, if you're a major corporation that locates in the park, you essentially make your own ties with that university. You build your own relationships, whether it's through a desire for students or talent or research. And so that's really been sort of a case-by-case, individual relationship by individual relationship. What we're looking at now is how about the convergence of all of those technologies with the universities. So now you don't only have a bioscience company that's just biosciences. They're interested in what they're going to be doing with networking and telecommunications. They're interested in the relationship between UNC and NC State. So there's a greater interest in collaboration and convergence among those universities. Because all three universities sit on my board, their presidents, chancellors, and the president of UNC Systems sits on our board, we have a lot of conversations about how to make that work effectively and efficiently. And because there's a great history, they actually work pretty well at it. We'd like to see more university activity in the park, and so we're working with them on how to expand that right now.
Stan?
Bob, the park's been so essential to the Triangle in North Carolina. Talk more about the ripple effect that the benefits of the Research Triangle Park are having on our broader region, our state, the Southeast, the world. Yeah,
well, there still are very few places in the world you can go where people haven't heard of RTP. And I think nationally, it is considered among those 3 or 4 innovation hotspots: Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, and RTP. I just got back from a conference where we were talking about the smartest places on earth, and RTP is considered one of those places. Now, when I first took this job, one of the things I did was we took a bus tour across North Carolina just to find out how were people around North Carolina feeling about the park. Were we still having an impact? And this is what I heard. What I heard was, yes, what you do at RTP is very important because your global brand helps our brand. So if you're in Asheville, Wilmington, Elizabeth City, when you say we're from North Carolina, there's a recognition of RTP. Number 2 is they want to know how they can connect more with what we're doing. And we're looking for ways in which we can link more of the challenges that our communities have with the successes of RTP and find ways in which we can make that relationship. But I think more than anything, when you look at RTP and you look at our region, there's been far more growth today outside of the park specifically. We have begun to see this amazing sort of regional component. When I was brought in for ICAR, it was because of the RTP reputation that people wanted to see if we could bring some of that into what they're doing at CU ICAR. So that reputation, that regional impact, it's real, it means something to people, and we got to make sure that we keep at it.
We got about a minute left, Bob.
Yeah,
and as this organic idea of what RTP is going to be, how do you make sure this is not like the new Coke and you end up 5 years from now going, this was completely the wrong direction. This version 2.0 is not working.
Yeah, that's a great. So I often remind people, we're 7,000 acres in RTP. That's about half the size of the island of Manhattan. And then I say, and we don't have a Starbucks anywhere in RTP, right? So we may be the only 7,000 acre. We may be the only 7,000 acre site in the world that doesn't have a Starbucks. But what we said was when we started this, we said, but it has to be about more than a Starbucks or a Jimmy John's, right? So we set 4 goals. Whatever we do has to be highly collaborative, physically and programmatically. It has to be authentic and genuine to who we are. We're not out to be a lifestyle center, a shopping mall. It has to be reflective of our values. Number 3, it needs to be inspiring, which I spoke about earlier. And finally, accessible and affordable.
We want you back because we want you to flesh this out a little bit more. This is not nearly enough time. And since you're both, sorry, Ted, but since both these guys are state, I guess the Catholics beating the Presbyterians in the Final Four of the NCAA doesn't really matter anymore. Thank you, Bob. Good to have you here. Best of luck going forward. Please do come back. Yeah. Stan, would like you back sooner rather than later. Ted, always like having you on the program. So, gentlemen, thank you for being on the program. If you have any questions or comments, carolinabusinessreview.org. We'd love to hear your comments as always. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.